The day I walked down the aisle, my smile felt like a lie. Everyone thought I was marrying the perfect man. Ryan was charming, handsome, the younger brother who swept me off my feet when I was tired of waiting. He promised me laughter and love, the kind of whirlwind romance every girl dreams of. But as I reached the altar, my eyes found his brother, Ethan. The one I first loved. The one who never fought for me. He stood there in the shadows, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on me like he was watching his own heart being buried alive. I told myself I had moved on, that Ethan's silence had made my choice for me. And yet, in that moment, my knees almost buckled. When Ryan slipped the ring on my finger, Ethan looked away. My heart broke louder than the applause. That night, as Ryan celebrated with champagne and careless kisses, I slipped out onto the balcony. The city lights blurred below me, but I couldn't breathe. And then, I felt it. That heavy stare. Ethan was already there. He didn't speak. He just looked at me with that same tortured expression, like he wanted to say everything he never did. His hand twitched at his side like he almost reached for me. And for one fleeting second, I wondered if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. Then Ryan's voice echoed behind me, slurred, calling my name, coming closer. I froze between the brother I married and the brother I could never forget. Ethan took one step forward, my heart lurched, and in that razor-thin moment, I knew something was about to break. "Babe?" Ryan's voice cut through the night, warm and playful, though his words slurred slightly from too many glasses of champagne. My stomach tightened, and I took a step back from Ethan as though I'd been caught doing something I shouldn't, though neither of us had spoken a single word. Ethan's eyes stayed locked on mine for one heartbeat longer, then he slipped his hands into his pockets and gave a stiff nod. Without another glance, he walked past us, disappearing into the glow of the ballroom. Ryan slipped an arm around my waist, pulling me against him. "There you are," he murmured, pressing a kiss against my cheek. "You can't keep sneaking away from your new husband on our wedding night." He laughed like it was a joke, his cologne and the smell of champagne clinging to him. I forced a smile, but my chest was still tight from the way Ethan's eyes had burned into me only moments earlier. That night, as Ryan drifted off into a drunken sleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My hand toyed with the ring on my finger, its weight both comforting and suffocating. I should have felt secure, happy, complete. Instead, all I could see was Ethan's face when he looked at me across the altar. The following week was a whirlwind. Honeymoon trips, lavish dinners, Ryan's easy charm pulling me along like a current. He was magnetic in every room, always ready with a joke, always smiling. Strangers adored him. Friends envied me. And for a while, I almost convinced myself everything was perfect. But small things lingered. He forgot the name of the waiter who'd served us every night on the island, even after I'd gently reminded him twice. He left his phone buzzing face down on the table more often than I liked, brushing it off with a quick grin and a "just work stuff, don't worry." He laughed off the little promises he forgot as though they were nothing, like the sunset cruise we'd planned, the one he cancelled last minute because he'd made friends at the hotel bar. None of it was damning, not on its own. But the details added up, and sometimes, when I caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw the uncertainty in my own eyes. When we returned home, reality seeped back in. Family dinners with the Hales, charity functions, evenings where Ryan came alive under chandeliers while I smiled on his arm. Ethan was always there, quiet but impossible to ignore. He rarely spoke to me directly, but the air seemed to shift when he entered the room. And whenever his eyes met mine, I felt exposed, like he could see straight through the glittering facade I'd built. One night, after a long dinner at his parents' house, I lingered in the hallway, waiting for Ryan to finish telling a story in the other room. Ethan passed by, pausing only for a moment. His voice was low, steady. "You don't have to pretend all the time, Sophia." My breath caught, but before I could answer, Ryan's laughter spilled into the hallway, and Ethan moved on without looking back. I stood frozen, wondering what he had seen in me that night, and why his words shook me more than anything Ryan had said since the day he promised me forever. The weeks after our honeymoon blurred into a polished routine, the kind of life that looked flawless from the outside. Ryan had a way of filling silence with his energy, his laughter always a little louder than it needed to be, his stories stretching longer than the truth could possibly allow. People adored him. At every event we attended, I watched women lean in a little too closely, men clap him on the back as if he belonged to some untouchable circle of charm and success. I told myself I was lucky, that I had chosen well. Yet late at night, when the house grew quiet and I lay awake beside him, I sometimes felt lonelier than I had before I was married. He would scroll through his phone in bed, chuckling at messages he never explained, then toss it on the nightstand and kiss my forehead as though that erased the distance. I tried to believe him when he said it was nothing, that it was just work, just friends, just harmless fun. But the questions piled up silently in my chest, heavier each day. At family dinners, it became a game to pretend everything was perfect. Ryan basked in attention, retelling the same stories I had already heard twice before. His parents laughed politely, his younger cousin stared at him like he was a celebrity. And Ethan sat quietly, speaking only when asked, his eyes too observant for comfort. Sometimes, when the laughter around the table grew too loud, I would glance at him and find his gaze already on me, steady and unblinking, as though he could hear the thoughts I was choking back. Once, when Ryan left mid-dinner to take a call, I felt Ethan's eyes follow me as I refilled my glass of water with a hand that trembled just slightly. He didn't say a word, but in his silence I felt exposed, as if every crack in my smile was visible to him alone. Ryan's charm was effortless, but it carried shadows. He loved to be admired, and I began to notice how much he needed that admiration. When he spoke to other women, it was always with a spark of playfulness, never enough to accuse, but enough to leave me unsettled. He would brush it off with a laugh if I questioned him, pulling me close in public, whispering that I was the only one he wanted. It worked for a while. It always worked, until the quiet came again and I remembered how easily he had dismissed my feelings. One evening, we attended a gala for one of his father's companies. I had spent hours preparing, wearing a dress Ryan had insisted would turn heads. It did. People complimented me, but Ryan barely noticed. He was too busy mingling, too busy drinking, too busy basking in the glow of the crowd. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, clutching my glass, feeling more like an ornament than a partner. That was when Ethan appeared beside me. He didn't touch me, didn't even look at me at first. He simply stood there, his presence a steady contrast to the chaos of the room. "You don't like these parties," he said after a long pause, his voice quiet enough that I wondered if I had imagined it. I turned to him, startled. "What makes you say that?" He finally looked at me then, his expression unreadable. "Because you never smile when you think no one's watching." The words landed heavier than I expected, and before I could respond, Ryan's laughter rang out across the room. Ethan's gaze flicked toward his brother, then back to me, softer this time but no less piercing. "You deserve to be seen, Sophia," he murmured, and then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd as if he had never been there. My heart pounded long after he left. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining the weight of his words. But the truth was that Ethan had noticed something Ryan never had. He saw me, even when I tried to disappear. The night ended in a blur of flashing cameras and Ryan tugging me into the car, tipsy and triumphant. "You looked amazing tonight," he said, leaning against me with a grin. "You're perfect for me, Soph. Everyone sees it." His words were warm, but his eyes were glazed with drink, his phone buzzing in his pocket. I pressed my head against the cool glass of the window and let him talk, my thoughts tangled in the sound of Ethan's voice echoing in the back of my mind. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern only deepened. Ryan was brilliant in public, reckless in private. He made plans he forgot to keep, promises he broke with a smile, mistakes he smoothed over with gifts and charm. And I kept pretending, because that was what a good wife was supposed to do. But every time Ethan's eyes met mine, I felt the fragile walls I had built start to shake. One night, when Ryan was late coming home again, I sat alone on the balcony of our house, staring out at the city lights. The air was cool, the silence heavy, and I let the mask slip for the first time in weeks. My chest ached with words I couldn't say, questions I couldn't ask. And then, as if the night itself was conspiring against me, my phone buzzed with a message. It wasn't from Ryan. It was from Ethan. Just 3 words. Simple, unassuming. But they knocked the air from my lungs. Are you okay? I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling over the keys, knowing that no matter how I answered, nothing would ever be the same. Ryan came home an hour later than he promised, stumbling through the door with that same boyish grin that could disarm anyone but me. He kissed my forehead quickly, almost distractedly, and tossed his jacket over the back of a chair. Sorry, Soph, he said, voice casual, work ran long. You know how it is. His phone buzzed in his pocket as he spoke, and I watched the way his eyes flickered down at the screen before he shoved it back quickly, out of sight. I wanted to ask. I wanted to know why it seemed he always had more time for everyone else than he did for me. But the words caught in my throat, and instead I just nodded, slipping my phone face down on the table so he wouldn't see the unanswered message still glowing on the screen. Ethan's words haunted me even then. Are you okay? Such a simple question, one Ryan had never bothered to ask. The days blurred into routines again, each one polished and gleaming on the outside. Brunches with friends where I wore the perfect dress and laughed at the right moments. Dinners with Ryan's colleagues where I played the part of the supportive wife, smiling at his stories as though I hadn't heard them dozens of times before. But beneath the surface, the silence between us was growing. I noticed things, how often Ryan's phone buzzed late at night, how quickly he stepped out of the room to answer calls, how easily he brushed me off when I asked where he'd been. Don't worry, babe. It's nothing. Always nothing. Always dismissed with a grin and a kiss that lingered just long enough to keep me quiet. It was at another one of those dinners that I felt the weight of it most. Ryan was in his element, charming a group of investors with a story about a golf trip I knew had never happened. I sat there, nodding, laughing at the right moments, but my mind was elsewhere. I looked across the table and met Ethan's eyes. He hadn't said much all evening, but he didn't need to. His gaze held me, steady and unreadable, and for a fleeting moment, I thought he could see the exhaustion I had buried beneath the surface. I broke the contact quickly, staring down at my glass, but I could still feel it, his silent understanding, his quiet presence that said more than Ryan's words ever could. Later that night, Ryan fell asleep quickly, his phone buzzing twice on the nightstand before he silenced it. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with questions I couldn't ask. Why did Ethan look at me like that? Why did his words linger when Ryan slipped away so easily? And most of all, why did I feel more seen in Ethan's silence than in all of Ryan's affection? The answer came slowly, over weeks. Ryan's patterns deepened. More late nights. More careless promises. More moments where I found myself alone in a room full of people while he basked in the attention of strangers. And every time, without fail, Ethan was there. Not too close, never inappropriate, but always near enough to notice. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his words lodged deep. One evening, after a particularly long charity gala, Ryan left early with some friends, his excuse a quick kiss on my cheek and a promise he'd make it up to me later. I stayed behind, too tired to argue, sipping water in a corner as the crowd thinned. Ethan found me there. You shouldn't let him do that, he said quietly, his voice calm but edged with something sharper. My head snapped up. Do what? Leave you alone. Treat you like an afterthought. My chest tightened. It's not like that. He's just busy. He has a lot on his plate. Ethan's eyes softened, though his jaw clenched. He doesn't realize what he has. And I'm not sure he ever will. The words sat between us, heavy and unspoken. I wanted to argue, to defend Ryan, to protect the fragile illusion of our marriage. But I couldn't. Because in that moment, I knew Ethan was right. Ryan didn't see me, not really. Not the way Ethan did. I turned away quickly, blinking back the sting in my eyes. You shouldn't say things like that. I know, Ethan murmured. And then, softer still, but I can't watch you disappear. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. And then someone called my name from across the room, shattering the moment. When I looked back, Ethan was gone, leaving me with nothing but the echo of his words. From that night on, I found myself noticing things I hadn't before. The way Ethan always seemed to know when I needed an exit from a conversation. How he lingered near enough to step in if Ryan left me stranded in a room. How his gaze found me in a crowd without fail, steady and grounding. He never overstepped, never crossed a line, but the air between us was charged, humming with everything we didn't say. And still, I stayed. I played my role as Ryan's wife, smiled for the cameras, pretended his distracted affection was enough. But inside, a quiet storm was building. Because for all of Ryan's charm, for all of his grand gestures, he never once asked the one question that mattered. He never asked if I was okay. Ethan had. And that changed everything. One evening, when Ryan was gone again, another late meeting, another night where I was left alone, I found myself on the balcony, staring out at the city. My phone buzzed, and I already knew who it would be before I picked it up. Are you alone? 3 words, harmless on the surface, but they made my heart race. I typed out a reply, erased it, typed again. Finally, I sent the safest answer I could manage. Yes. I stared at the screen, waiting, my chest tight. A minute later, his response came. You don't deserve to be. My fingers trembled, the glow of the screen burning into me. I told myself it was just concern, just his way of checking in. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was more than that. It had always been more than that. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the pull between us was only getting stronger. The days that followed were a blur of appearances and obligations, but underneath it all I felt a shift I couldn't ignore. Ryan was busier than ever, always with a reason to be late, always with an excuse ready before I could even form a question. He was charming enough to make the excuses sound convincing, but they landed softer each time, leaving behind an emptiness that grew sharper in the silence between us. I kept playing the part, kept smiling when people looked at me, kept telling myself this was what marriage looked like. Yet the nights felt colder, and when I reached for Ryan in bed, he was often turned away, scrolling through his phone or already half asleep. He had a way of making me feel like I was both the center of his world and completely invisible all at once. At a family function one weekend, I sat at the long polished table as Ryan recounted one of his usual stories, larger than life, his laughter booming across the room. Everyone leaned in, eating up every word, and I laughed too, because that was what was expected of me. But then my gaze drifted across the table and landed on Ethan. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't even listening. He was watching me, his expression unreadable but his eyes too clear, too sharp. I quickly looked away, a flush creeping into my cheeks, but the weight of his stare lingered like a touch. Later that night, when the family began to scatter, I caught a glimpse of Ethan leaving the room just as Ryan was pulled into another conversation. For a moment, I considered following, just to breathe away from the noise, but I forced myself to stay where I was, gripping the stem of my glass until my knuckles whitened. I told myself I couldn't let the distance between Ryan and me become visible. I couldn't let anyone see what Ethan already seemed to know. Ryan and I left late that evening, and in the car he was distracted, tapping through messages on his phone as the driver pulled us through the quiet streets. I sat in silence, staring out the window, until Ryan reached over and squeezed my hand without looking at me. You were amazing tonight, Soph. Everyone kept saying how lucky I am. I smiled faintly, though my chest tightened with words I didn't say. Lucky. It was the kind of thing people said when they saw only the surface. A few nights later, we attended another gala, another chance for Ryan to shine. He looked perfect in his suit, confident and magnetic, his hand at the small of my back as we entered. Cameras flashed, people swarmed, and for the first hour I played the part flawlessly. But as Ryan moved from group to group, laughter echoing around the room, I found myself drifting toward the edge of the crowd. That was when I felt it again, that quiet shift, that subtle awareness. I didn't have to look to know Ethan was near. When I finally did, he was across the room, speaking to someone but watching me in that way only he could. Not obvious, not inappropriate, but steady, like he could sense the weight I was carrying. I tore my gaze away quickly, forcing myself back into a conversation with a woman beside me, but the heat in my chest didn't fade. Ryan eventually returned, draping an arm around my shoulders and pulling me close, his charm overflowing as he whispered something meant to make me laugh. I did, though it sounded hollow even to me. And across the room, Ethan had already turned away, his expression hidden. That night, lying beside Ryan as he scrolled through his phone with a grin I couldn't see, I thought about how quiet Ethan had been. He didn't say much, he never did. But somehow his silence said more than Ryan's words ever could. And the worst part was, I couldn't stop hearing it. Ryan's habits were becoming harder to ignore. He still dazzled in public, still knew how to make the world fall at his feet, but behind closed doors there was a carelessness that settled like dust over everything. He missed dinners we had planned together, brushed me off with casual apologies, and started answering calls in another room. If I asked, he would grin and tell me I worried too much, kiss me on the forehead, and assure me it was just business. For a while, I wanted to believe him. I told myself he was just busy, that marriage was supposed to be about compromise. But the doubt never left, it just grew sharper each time he slipped away with his phone buzzing in his pocket. The worst part wasn't the secrets, it was how easy he made them look. One evening, after he forgot to pick me up for a fundraiser we had both agreed to attend, I arrived alone, the whispers following me as soon as I stepped inside. People smiled politely, but I could feel their glances, the murmurs about why Ryan Hale's wife was alone. My cheeks burned as I forced my way through the crowd, clutching my glass like it was armor. And then, like it always seemed to happen, Ethan appeared. He didn't come straight to me, he never did. He simply emerged near the edge of the room, catching my eye like he had been waiting for me to notice him. When Ryan finally stumbled in an hour late, still buzzing with energy, he barely noticed the whispers that had bruised me. He swept me into his arms in front of everyone, kissed my cheek, and laughed off his tardiness like it was nothing. The crowd forgave him instantly, charmed as always, but I couldn't. Because in that moment, I knew someone had seen the truth, Ethan had. That night, back home, Ryan passed out almost immediately, his phone buzzing once before he silenced it and rolled over. I sat by the window, staring out at the lights of the city, and my chest ached. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I didn't even need to look to know who it was. "Did he leave you waiting again?" The words made me tremble, not because of what they said but because of how much they revealed. I typed and erased a reply 3 times before finally sending back a single word. "Yes." The dots blinked for a moment before Ethan's reply came. "You deserve better." I locked my phone quickly, as though Ryan might somehow see it in his sleep, but the words stayed with me, echoing louder than the silence of the room. Over the next weeks, the pattern only deepened. Ryan's red flags weren't explosions, they were shadows that stretched slowly across the walls of our marriage. He canceled plans, forgot details I had told him just days earlier, brushed away my feelings with that same charming smile that convinced everyone else. And Ethan kept appearing at the edges, never too close, never overstepping, but always there. Always watching, always noticing. At another event, when Ryan left me alone at the table for nearly an hour while he mingled, Ethan passed by and paused just briefly. He didn't sit, he didn't make a scene. He only said one quiet sentence as his hand brushed the back of my chair. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." Then he walked on, leaving me frozen in my seat, my pulse racing, his words wrapping around me tighter than Ryan's arm ever did. It was then that I realized the storm was coming. My marriage was not built on the solid ground I had tried to believe in, it was cracking, and Ryan didn't even see it. But Ethan did. He saw everything. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more impossible it became, because part of me no longer wanted to look away. Over the next few weeks came little signs I tried to dismiss. A perfume I didn't wear lingering faintly on Ryan's jacket, a lipstick mark on a glass in the sink that wasn't mine, his constant excuses about late meetings that left him unreachable for hours. Each time, he would laugh it off, pulling me close with that easy charm that had once swept me away, promising I was imagining things, that I was the only woman he wanted. But the cracks had been growing too long for me to ignore, and deep down I knew what I was about to find. One evening, after another vague excuse about a late-night business dinner, I decided I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I drove across town to the hotel Ryan had mentioned in passing and walked into the lobby with my heart pounding like a drum. I told myself I was wrong, that I would see him alone, buried in work, and feel guilty for doubting him. But as the elevator doors opened to the top-floor suite, I heard laughter, his laughter, low and familiar, tangled with the sound of a woman's voice. My legs carried me forward even as my chest tightened, and when I pushed the door open without knocking, the image seared itself into my memory. Ryan, shirt half unbuttoned, leaning far too close to a woman sprawled across the couch, a bottle of champagne open on the table between them. They both froze when they saw me, but the damage was already done. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just stood there, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me, heavier than anything I had ever carried. "Sophia," Ryan stammered, scrambling to his feet, "this isn't what it looks like." The woman shot me a look that was more pity than guilt before slipping past me quickly, leaving the two of us alone. I laughed then, a hollow sound that surprised even me. "Not what it looks like? Do you think I'm blind, Ryan? Do you think I haven't noticed the late nights, the lies, the way you've been slipping away from me since the day we said I do?" He reached for me, his face desperate. "It was a mistake. I swear it didn't mean anything. You're the one I want, Sophia. You're my wife." I stepped back before his hand could touch me, my voice shaking but sharp. "Your wife. That word is supposed to mean something. But to you, it's just a title. You wanted me because I looked good on your arm, because I made you seem untouchable. But you never saw me, not once. And now I see you, Ryan. I see exactly who you are." His face twisted, panic flashing in his eyes. "Don't do this. Please. We can fix it, no one has to know." No, my voice cut through his. "We're done. You made sure of that the moment you chose someone else over me." I walked out before he could stop me, my hands trembling, tears burning my eyes but never falling. I had spent too long pretending, too long convincing myself the cracks were small enough to mend. But tonight, the illusion had shattered for good. When I returned home, the silence of the house was suffocating. I packed a bag with shaking hands, unsure where I would go but knowing I couldn't stay. The next morning, whispers spread faster than I could have imagined. Ryan tried to spin the story, tried to call me, tried to smooth it over with apologies and promises, but I ignored every word. For once, I didn't care about appearances. I cared about myself. It wasn't until the following weekend, at another family gathering I had almost skipped, that I saw the proof of what happened after. Ryan walked in late, his jaw tight, his cheek darkened with a fading bruise that makeup couldn't quite hide. He smiled as though nothing had changed, but when he sat down, I saw the flicker of humiliation in his eyes. My gaze drifted across the table to Ethan, and for just a moment, I caught sight of his hand as he lifted his glass. The faint shadow of a bruise across his knuckles said more than words ever could. Our eyes met, and I knew. Ethan had found out. He had confronted Ryan. And while he would never admit it, never make it about him, the truth was written in the silence between us. Ryan avoided my gaze the entire evening, his usual charm dampened, his laughter brittle. Ethan never spoke of it, never even hinted at what had happened, but the quiet fire in his eyes when they met mine told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't fighting for me, not yet, but he had drawn a line. And for the first time since my wedding day, I felt the weight on my chest begin to lift. The marriage I had tried so desperately to preserve was over. And though I didn't know what the future would hold, one thing was certain, I would never let myself be invisible again. After I ended things with Ryan, the silence was almost unbearable at first. No more hurried footsteps coming in late at night, no more forced laughter filling the spaces between us, no more phone buzzing against the nightstand while I pretended not to notice. For the first time in months, I was alone, and it terrified me. But beneath that fear was something else, relief. I didn't owe anyone my smiles anymore. I didn't have to play the role of the perfect wife while wondering when the floor would give out beneath me. The air felt different, like I could finally breathe without choking on the weight of pretending. I moved into a smaller apartment downtown, nothing like the lavish house Ryan and I had shared, but it was mine. The walls were bare at first, but as the weeks passed I began to fill them with pieces of myself I had lost somewhere along the way, books stacked by the window, paintings I'd tucked away years ago, photographs of places I loved. I cooked my own meals, stayed up late reading, and learned the sound of my own thoughts without Ryan's voice drowning them out. Ethan didn't intrude. He didn't show up uninvited or push himself into the cracks of my new life. He was there when family gatherings required it, quiet and steady, but he kept his distance. And somehow, that made me notice him more. At a dinner one evening, Ryan barely spoke, still sulking in the corner like a shadow of the man he used to be. I sat across the table, feeling the weight of eyes on me, whispers swirling about the broken marriage. When I looked up, Ethan was watching me. Not with pity, not with judgment, just with that same unwavering gaze that made me feel like I didn't need to hide. He didn't approach me, didn't speak a word, but the pull was there, strong and undeniable, a reminder that he saw me even when the rest of the world was content with the story they thought they knew. In the quiet moments I sometimes felt the pull toward Ethan like a tide I couldn't ignore. The thought crossed my mind more than once, to call him, to show up at his door, to let myself fall into the arms of the man I had wanted all along. But each time I caught myself, stopping short with the phone in my hand or the steering wheel turned just slightly in the wrong direction. Not now. Not yet. The right time hadn't come, and something in me knew I had to face myself first before I could face him. What surprised me most was how much Ethan seemed to understand that too. He didn't come chasing me, didn't take advantage of the cracks in my heart. His silence was almost protective, as though he knew I needed to put myself back together before I could let anyone else in. I threw myself into work, taking on projects I had once set aside for Ryan's sake. I had skills, connections, ideas I had buried under the pressure of being someone else's perfect partner. Now, I let them breathe again. Slowly, I carved out a new space for myself, one that belonged only to me. Friends who had drifted away during my marriage began to return, surprised at the version of me they hadn't seen in years. "You look happier," one of them said over coffee. I smiled then, a real smile, because it was true. Happiness didn't come all at once, but it was there, in the small moments of freedom I was reclaiming. Still, there were times when loneliness crept in, when the nights felt too long and the silence too heavy. On those nights, I would find my phone glowing with a single message from Ethan. Never demanding, never pressing, always simple. "Are you home safe? Did you eat?" Sometimes just one word, "Good night." It was enough to remind me I wasn't invisible. It was enough to keep me steady. The first time I saw him again outside of a family obligation was by accident. I had stopped at a cafe on my way home, a notebook open in front of me as I sketched ideas for a project. When I looked up, Ethan was standing at the counter, ordering a black coffee like the world wasn't spinning on its axis just because he was there. Our eyes met, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. He walked over, nodding toward the seat across from me. "Is this taken?" I shook my head, and he sat down, not pushing, not probing, just sipping his coffee while I tried to calm the storm in my chest. We spoke lightly. About work, about the weather, about the books I had stacked on the table. And when he left, he didn't linger. He just said, "It's good to see you," in that low, steady voice, and I knew he meant it. It was in moments like these, subtle and fleeting, that I felt the pull between us the strongest. Not in declarations or grand gestures, but in the quiet spaces where he let me breathe, where he didn't demand more than I could give. I wasn't ready for anything else, not yet. I needed to find myself fully before I could belong to anyone again. And Ethan, unlike Ryan, seemed to understand that without me having to say it. But as much as I tried to focus on my own path, the truth remained. Every time our eyes met, every time his words lingered long after he was gone, the storm between us grew stronger. I could ignore it for now, bury it under independence and self-discovery, but I knew it wouldn't stay quiet forever. And somewhere deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted it to. The weeks turned into months, and the space I carved for myself became more than survival, it became freedom. I built a routine that was mine alone, a life that didn't revolve around keeping someone else happy. And yet, no matter how full my days became, there were still moments when my thoughts drifted to Ethan. It wasn't the way they used to, back when it was nothing but longing and regret. Now it was quieter, steadier, as though he had become a part of the air I breathed without realizing it. Every family event, every brief encounter, every message that asked nothing more than if I was okay, it all chipped away at the walls I had built around myself. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I returned to my apartment to find Ethan waiting outside. He wasn't leaning dramatically against the door or carrying flowers, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, calm as ever. My heart stuttered, but before I could speak he said, "Don't worry, I'm not here to push. I just wanted to walk you upstairs. Make sure you weren't alone tonight." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that left me breathless. We rode the elevator together in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable but thick with everything we didn't say. When we reached my floor, I unlocked the door and turned back to him, torn between inviting him in and holding back. He seemed to read my hesitation because he only smiled faintly and said, "Good night, Sophia." Then he left, and I stood in the doorway, my chest aching with a mix of relief and longing. It was then I realized what set Ethan apart. He gave me space even when every part of him wanted to close the distance. That restraint, that respect, was what made me trust him in a way I had never trusted Ryan. The turning point came unexpectedly. I had been working late, the city already wrapped in darkness by the time I packed up and left the office. My phone buzzed with a message, "Are you heading home?" And without thinking I replied, "Yes." 10 minutes later, I found him waiting at the corner near my building, leaning casually against a lamppost as though he had been part of the night all along. "You didn't have to come," I said, my voice softer than I meant. Ethan shrugged. "I know. But I wanted to." We walked together in silence, the air between us charged with unspoken words. When we reached my door, I finally turned to him, my heart pounding. "Why do you keep doing this?" I asked. "Why do you keep looking out for me?" His eyes searched mine, steady and unflinching. "Because I couldn't before. And I won't make that mistake again." The truth was in his voice, in the way his hand twitched slightly like he wanted to reach for me but held back. My chest ached with everything we had both carried for too long. For the first time, I didn't stop myself. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him, close enough that if I leaned in even an inch our lips would meet. "I'm not the same person I was when I married Ryan," I whispered. "I don't want to lose myself again." His gaze softened, and he shook his head. "I don't want you to. I just want you to be you. That's all I've ever wanted." The honesty in his words unraveled something inside me, and before I could think, I closed the distance. The kiss was slow at first, hesitant, as if we were both afraid the world might collapse around us. But when his hand finally slid against my cheek, steady and sure, the hesitation melted into something undeniable. It wasn't desperate, it wasn't rushed, it was years of silence breaking all at once. When we finally pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his, my breath unsteady. "This feels different," I murmured. Ethan smiled faintly, his thumb brushing along my jaw. "That's because it is. We're not running anymore." From that night on, things didn't magically fall into place, but they didn't need to. We built it slowly, carefully, with the patience of two people who knew what it meant to lose everything. Ryan faded into the background, his charm no longer able to hide the truth. I stopped hearing whispers of pity when I walked into a room and instead felt the quiet strength of someone who had chosen herself first. And Ethan was always there, not to overshadow me, not to claim me, but to stand beside me as I found myself again. The love that grew between us wasn't the whirlwind Ryan had once offered, it was steadier, deeper, a love that had survived silence, mistakes, and time. And when Ethan finally took my hand in his without hesitation, I knew. I had married the wrong brother, but in the end, I had found the right one. Not because he saved me, but because he waited, he saw me, and when I was ready, he loved me the way I had always deserved to be loved.